You laugh a little too fast when someone gets annoyed with you. You apologize for things that were never your fault. You can walk into a room and know, within seconds, exactly what mood everyone is in, and you have never once stopped to ask why. Most people call this being sensitive, being easygoing, being a good listener. But if you grew up with a narcissistic parent, none of that is a personality trait. It is a survival system, one that was built so early and so quietly that you never noticed it being installed. Today, 4 of those traits, not the obvious ones, not low self-esteem, not people-pleasing, in the way it gets talked about on the surface, the traits underneath those traits, the ones that explain why you feel exhausted in rooms other people find relaxing, why compliments feel like threats, why you can spot a mood shift in someone else faster than you can spot one in yourself. And by the end, you will understand something that sounds backwards but isn't. These traits were never weaknesses. They were the smartest adaptations a child could make to an environment that offered no other option. Start with the first one, the emotional barometer. If you grew up with a narcissistic parent, you learn to read a room before you learn to read a book. Not metaphorically, literally. Children raised in unpredictable emotional environments develop what psychologists call hypervigilance, a nervous system that is constantly scanning for danger, even when nothing dangerous is happening. Here is why that happened. A narcissistic parent's mood is not caused by logic. It is caused by whether their ego was fed or starved that day, which means the child cannot predict it using normal cause and effect. Do the dishes, and one day it earns praise. The next day, the exact same action earns silence and a slammed cupboard. The behavior isn't the variable, the parent's internal state is, so the child stops trying to predict behavior and starts trying to predict mood instead. This is where the emotional barometer gets built. You start reading micro-expressions. The speed of footsteps down a hallway, the tone of a single word like fine. You become fluent in a language most people never had to learn because most people's parents didn't require them to learn it just to feel safe at the dinner table. The problem is, that skill doesn't turn off once you leave the house. It runs in the background of every relationship you have, every meeting, every text message that takes 10 minutes to reply. You are not overreacting. You are running a threat detection system built for a house that no longer exists, in rooms where the danger has already left. This connects to what the psychiatrist John Bowlby described in his research on attachment. Children form internal models of relationships based on how consistently their caregivers respond to them. Inconsistent, mood-driven responses don't just create anxiety in the moment. They create a lasting template, one where safety is never assumed. It has to be earned moment by moment, read by read. Which brings the second trait into focus, the fawn response. Most people have heard of fight, flight, and freeze. Fewer have heard of the fourth response, a term coined by the therapist Pete Walker. Fawning. It means responding to threat not by resisting it, but by appeasing it. Becoming agreeable. Becoming useful. Becoming impossible to be angry at. If you grew up with a narcissistic parent, fawning wasn't a choice. It was the only strategy that reliably worked. Fighting back got punished. Withdrawing got punished even harder, often labeled as coldness or ingratitude. But agreement, flattery, emotional labor, absorbing blame that wasn't yours, these things could sometimes buy peace. So the nervous system learned the lesson early. Safety comes from managing other people's feelings, not from expressing your own. This is why, as an adult, conflict feels unbearable even when it's small. A coworker raises their voice slightly and your body reacts like something catastrophic is happening. You find yourself agreeing with a plan you actually disagree with, apologizing in an argument you didn't start, smoothing things over before you've even processed what you feel. That isn't weakness. That is a nervous system executing a program that once kept you safe, running on autopilot in situations where it isn't needed anymore. Here's the part that rarely gets said out loud. Fawning worked. That's exactly why it's still here. The brain doesn't discard strategies that succeeded. It keeps them on standby, ready to deploy, because as far as your nervous system is concerned, the parent might still be in the next room. Third trait, chronic self-doubt about your own perception. Not doubt about ability, doubt about reality itself. If you grew up with a narcissistic parent, you likely experienced some version of your feelings being rewritten in real time. You said you were hurt and you were told you were too sensitive. You said something happened and you were told it didn't happen that way or didn't happen at all. Over time, this creates a specific kind of erosion, not in confidence, but in trust of your own memory and judgment. This pattern has a name outside of pop psychology, too. Sustained, repeated denial of someone's accurate perception of events is a recognized form of psychological manipulation, and its long-term effect is measurable. People who experienced it chronically as children often describe a persistent internal question mark, even in situations where the facts are completely clear to everyone else in the room. This shows up in strange, specific ways. You reread text messages 5 times before responding, trying to find a hidden meaning that probably isn't there. You ask friends to confirm that what you experienced actually happened, even when you were the only witness. You hesitate before saying, "That hurt me," because some old buried part of you is already braced for the reply. "No, it didn't. You're overreacting." The tragedy of this trait is not that you doubt yourself too much. It's that you were trained to. Your internal alarm system was accurate the entire time. It was the external response to that alarm that got repeatedly, deliberately wrong. Fourth trait, difficulty receiving love, praise, or success without suspicion. This one confuses people the most, including the people who have it. Logically, being told you did something well should feel good. But if you grew up with a narcissistic parent, praise was never neutral. It was conditional, and often came with strings, timing, or an unspoken bill that would come due later. Sometimes praise was even used as a setup, a way to lower your guard before criticism landed. The psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott described a concept later expanded by the psychotherapist Alice Miller in her work on childhood and narcissistic parenting. The difference between a true self and a false self. Children of narcissistic parents often develop a highly tuned false self, an identity built around what earns approval, while the true self, the one with its own needs and reactions, gets pushed underground because it was never safe to express. The tragedy Miller pointed to is specific. That false self can become so convincing, so well-rehearsed, that even the person living inside it forgets it was ever a performance. This is why success can feel oddly hollow, why a compliment triggers a reflexive, "it was nothing," why some part of you is already waiting for the moment someone realizes you aren't as capable as they think. That isn't imposter syndrome in the shallow sense people usually mean. It's an old, learned expectation that good things get taken away, usually right after you start to believe in them. Now here's the reframe, the part that changes how all 4 of these traits should be understood. None of this was a flaw in your character. Every one of these traits was built by a child with almost no power, in an environment with almost no consistency, who still managed to find a way to stay safe. Reading a room instantly, de-escalating conflict before it starts, questioning your own perception rather than confronting someone stronger than you, staying small so success wouldn't be punished. These were not signs of weakness, they were the strategies of someone remarkably resourceful, operating under conditions most people never had to survive. The problem was never that you developed these traits. The problem is that nobody ever told you they were adaptations, not identities. A strategy built for one house does not have to be the operating system for the rest of your life. Recognizing a trait as a survival response rather than a personal defect is the first act that starts loosening its grip. The hypervigilance can be acknowledged and slowly, deliberately, retrained toward rooms that are actually safe. The fawning can be noticed in the moment it activates, and paused even briefly before the automatic agreement comes out. The self-doubt can be met with a simple, repeatable question. What do I actually remember happening, independent of what I was told I should remember? And the discomfort with praise can be sat with, on purpose, instead of deflected, until it stops feeling like a trap and starts feeling like something you're finally allowed to keep. None of this reverses overnight. But every one of these traits was learned, which means every one of them can be unlearned, slowly, with the same intelligence that built them in the first place. You were not born hypervigilant. You were not born unable to trust your own memory. You were not born allergic to your own success. You built all of it brilliantly as a child to survive a situation that gave you no better option. That child is not running your life anymore, but they are still owed something. Recognition, first, then, slowly, Permission to stop working so hard just to feel safe in a room that no longer holds any danger at all.